How's it going, everybody? So in this video, we are going to be discussing part two of having a bulletproof immune system and building bulletproof immunity. So in the first part of this video, we were discussing some of the factors involved in improving immunity and boosting immunity through things like consuming enough amino acids, consuming polyphenols, and engaging in hormetic activities. And those are all things to boost immunity beyond its normal functioning, and to improve it and to give your body the building blocks for your immune system to actually create things like killer T cells and glutathione and stuff like that. So it's more of the creation of a bulletproof immune system that we were talking about in part one. So in this part, we're going to be discussing the other half, and more so a big kind of like, I guess, what most people do wrong. And we're going to be discussing the things that actually hinder the immune system from working and damage the body and create a hindrance, create an overwhelmment in the immune system and in the body that makes it really, really hard for your body to be immune and to kill off a lot of these pathogens and things, and more so to prevent some of the negative symptoms that happen as a byproduct of the breakdown from extreme infections that the immune system is not geared towards solving. So definitely watch the first video, because I also talk about my own background and whatnot. And I talk about kind of like the foundational mechanisms on my own working understanding of immunity these days. And it's less concerned with like stimulating the immune system and stimulating some of these immune cells and things and lymphocytes and killer cells and all of these things. It's more so developing like a robust defense, okay? So anyway, let's talk about some of the factors that basically destroy your body's ability to become immune, okay? So a big thing here is, so look at some of the primary factors that seem to contribute to severe outcomes from a lot of infections, okay? So things like being overweight, like having excess body fat specifically. So excess adipose tissue, excess body fat actually does stimulate more pro-inflammatory cytokines and inflammatory byproducts. It also increases aromatization of testosterone into things like estrogen. So that's one of the main mechanisms involved in, excess body fat contributing to lower testosterone, for example. But I do think the whole testosterone thing is a bit more overblown, and it's kind of pushed as a means for these charlatans to sell testosterone boosting supplements that don't do jack shit. But it is a fact that excess body fat will produce more inflammatory byproducts. It will increase the amount of free radical damage, which puts a burden on glutathione and antioxidant systems. And so it's inflammatory by nature, so to speak. It's damaging by nature. Because remember, inflammation is not necessarily a bad thing. Inflammation is basically the response the body inflicts to heal from damage. So when you have an inflamed arm after getting beaten in jiu-jitsu practice, the redness and the puffiness is blood and nutrients being shuttled to that area to help with the healing process. So inflammation is a part of the healing process, but the damage itself is what we're worried about here. And having excess body fat damages the body systemically, which puts a burden on the antioxidant systems, glutathione, superoxide dismutase, and what's the other ones? What's some other antioxidant peroxides? So anyway, let's see. So beyond that, we have things like cigarette smoking. So cigarette smoking and what it basically does. So things like respiratory infections, for example. If you smoke cigarettes, especially chronically, and you have been for years, you are at a much higher risk statistically for severe outcomes. And a big reason why that's the case for things like respiratory infections, and also why you might have localized cancer in the respiratory system from smoking cigarettes, similarly to getting localized cancer in the mouth from chewing tobacco, is that for whatever reason there are toxic chemicals, and this is legit. Okay, it's not some new age spiritual toxin detox nonsense, but this is actually real toxins. Okay, as in the chemicals that literally create free radicals in that area. So, for example, cigarette smoking damages the lungs, creates free radical damage, which you won't be able to tell by looking at the lungs at first. But on a cellular level, like microscopically, we'll say, right, continuously damaging over and over again the longer you smoke, eventually create such a huge deficit of damage in that area that the antioxidant system can no longer repair or turn over those cells. And cancer growth is generally accepted to be kind of like a lack of recycling of the cells, which creates a malignant cell, which turns into a tumor, and that's what we know as cancer. And there's many different causes for many different types of cancers, but in this case is a perfect example of constantly damaging a certain area of the body through cigarette smoking until the body can no longer recycle those cells because the amount of damage exceeds the rate of recovery. And the rate of recovery is dependent upon glutathione and endogenous antioxidant systems, which is fueled by amino acids and protein, and then it's bolstered through hormetic activities like certain polyphenols and exercise, especially cardiovascular exercise on the lungs, creates a hormetic effect where your body can actually sustain or can actually recover from more oxidative damage in the lungs. That's why one of the reasons why cardio is so important. Same thing with the heart and the vessels. So anyway, when the body can no longer produce enough immune chemicals, it doesn't matter what we're talking about, glutathione and antioxidants inside, lymphocytes, killer T cells, and the various immune cells or immune chemicals that are produced in order to protect the body from free radicals, protect the body from foreign invaders and pathogens, you name it. If your body can no longer produce enough of these defender molecules compared to the amount of damage that's being inflicted, or compared to the viral load of whatever pathogen or the bacterial load, then you have like a net negative balance to where you experience more symptoms. Okay? So, yeah, it's kind of like how much defenses you have from all these things we discussed in part one versus how much damage we have from some of these things. So we talk about cigarette smoke. We talk about some of the pro-inflammatory byproducts that are produced from adipose tissue and extra body fat, cigarette smoking. So then there's things like refined sugar. So refined sugar, refined carbohydrates create endogenous advanced glycation end products. So for me, from what I've seen, combining people's experiences and my own especially, and people who don't get sick, especially people like me who used to get sick all the time and now I don't, and then using the mechanistic data, what I've seen is refined carbohydrates, they seem to have unique properties of increasing the amount of endogenous advanced glycation in products, which create more free radical damage, and just the metabolization of exogenous carbohydrates. From what I've seen, not only can an excess create things like fatty liver disease and triglycerides in the blood if you're not burning them off through vigorous exercise, too much energy coming in and not enough being burned on the energy going out. You get more body fat, not necessarily from carbs, but from energy intake in general. But the metabolizing carbohydrates exogenously for fuel creates a lot more reactive oxygen species and advanced glycation end products. And if you are open to the research on ketogenic diets and ketogenic metabolism enough to where you've actually read the papers by Stephen Finney and Jeff Volok, I own their books. Very complicated stuff. What you'll see is, for example, athletes who consume ketogenic diets, they seem to produce less reactive oxygen species, and there's a number of mechanisms of using endogenous fatty acids as fuel that seems to, number one, reduce the overall amount of reduce the overall amount of free radicals in the circulation, and number two, there are inflammatory properties of things like ketones and some of the direct effects of ketogenic metabolism after your body makes the deep visceral metabolic shifts to burning endogenous fuel sources versus exogenous, to the point where you see like a net positive in antioxidant systems and less free radical damage. Now, we don't have to really make this a keto versus like carb thing, but I do believe that too many refined carbohydrates in general hinder immunity to a large extent. And so if you're going to consume carbs, I think consuming them in a form that includes their, natural antioxidants alongside them, I think that actually might be the ticket here. And I don't think that it's any coincidence that people who, at the very least, remove refined carbs from their diet, even if they're following an if it fits your macros approach, and they stick to more fruits and tubers, for example, and non-starchy vegetables, that they see a decrease in their inflammatory conditions, they notice they get sick less, and they just feel better. And a lot of times, depression and some of these mood issues that are commonly associated with brain inflammation, for example, these things tend to resolve or at least significantly improve when people remove refined carbs from the diet. So I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of nutrients, the lack of exogenous antioxidants alongside the carbohydrates, and too much free radical damage being produced as a byproduct of the metabolism of these refined carbs. So, and as I mentioned in the last video, have noticed the more my diet resembles an animal-based diet and the less just overall carbs I eat in general, the less I get sick, really. But sickness for me tends to only come about when I'm consuming refined carbs and I'm not consuming adequate protein, really. So the main duty of the endogenous antioxidant system, and especially exogenous antioxidants, is to offset the damage that's done by the stresses of life, whether that's refined carbohydrates, exercise, burn trauma, trauma induced from chewing tobacco or smoking cigarettes, or you have like radiation and stuff in the environment. To me, the big factor involved in all of this seems to be the amount of power that your endogenous antioxidant systems or immune system can produce versus the amount of damage, the amount of infection, and then also how susceptible you are to it. And I think in regards to like infectious disease, For me, I've also seen when I'm not trying to be sterile all the time. Like, I don't use sanitizer. I don't want to go into detail on this, but let's just say I purposely make it a point to expose my body to as many of these like dangers as I can within reason, obviously. Like I'm not afraid to get dirty, basically. I'm not afraid to not wash my hands on a regular basis or something to that extent. Mind you, I do wash my hands after going to the restroom and shit like that. But I'm just saying, like, people are too sterile. And when you're too sterile, you lose that ruggedness of immunity to the things you're trying to be sterile against. And that's, immunity to infectious disease happens by exposure. Whether you're talking getting juiced, or we're talking just natural immunity. So I'm really big on natural immunity. And so that means exposing myself to the, infections within reason, and then like letting my immune system kind of deal with it. But the thing is, I also recognize one of the things is like a lot of people who are like, yeah, screw it. These infections are all made up and blah, blah, blah. But they're fat, they're out of shape, they don't really exercise, they eat refined sugars and refined carbs. They don't make it a point to consume tonic herbs or antioxidants or enough protein and this and that. Like the thing is, it's true, natural immunity can be built. But if you don't give your body the protein it needs to create those immune molecules, then you're going to be susceptible to infections. You're going to probably get more severe symptoms than somebody who's actually taking care of their health. So yeah, and I see a lot of people who are like, yeah, this is all made up, it's a hoax or whatever, screw that, I don't need to get juiced. It's like, well, getting juice is only effective if your immune system's healthy enough. First of all, that's a fact. But natural immunity, good luck being naturally immune to diseases if your diet is fucking junk, you're fat and overweight, and you're not exercising. You're going to be fucked no matter what you do. So it's very important to remove a lot of the, don't smoke cigarettes. Really, that's like your best protection. Don't be chewing tobacco. And really, if you really think all these, like, taking echinacea, which is not bad, but still, eating garlic, which I highly recommend for if you have an infection of some kind. But more specifically, things like consuming zinc supplements and stuff, like consuming vitamin C. Like, bro, if your diet and exercise and your lifestyle is not on check, forget it. Like, don't waste your money. That shit is not going to do jack shit compared to this. So, yeah. So it's an overall net damage versus net protection. So how, and there's a lot of different things that people do that creates inflammatory byproducts and free radicals, advanced glycation in products, like just by living, breathing oxygen and moving around. Your body's producing reactive oxygen species. But depending on how your metabolism is set up, like I mentioned, ketosis, a lot of people don't want to hear that. Or eating enough amino acids to support the glutathione production we need to offset their free radical damage. People take N-acetylcysteine supplements, and also they'll take reduced glutathione supplements as a supplement, like a precursor to their endogenous glutathione. It's like, well, if you just ate an adequate diet, you probably wouldn't need a lot of that. Now, N-acetylcysteine is a lifesaver in a lot of cases, and that's a good option. That's kind of like a hack for people who don't eat enough protein, I would say. But it has medicinal qualities. Another thing is like, I think fatty acids in particular, high omega-6 fatty acids. Again, another controversial thing. And things like trans fats. I think these are just kind of like breeding grounds for free radical damage in the body after consumption. And this is not the consensus. The consensus in evidence-based medicine is that omega-6 fats, things like seed oils and whatnot, are actually, they improve health outcomes if you look at certain outcome data. But from what my observation, the least amount of those seed oils that I consume, the less sick I get and the better I feel. And the more omega-3 fatty acids, the better I feel. And I think this is because, I'm talking about fish oil. Fish oil, direct precursor to anti-inflammatory prostaglandins. Omega-6 in general are direct precursors to inflammatory prostaglandins. So I don't understand why someone would want to base most of their diet on omega-6 fats. Because nutritively, that does not equate to positive health outcomes. But then we have the issue of oxidation, especially when you cook these foods. One of the major differences in traditional societies who used to be super healthy and have low rates of disease compared to modern society, if we look at certain parts of Asia, is they used to use animal fats for cooking, which are more saturated and to a lesser degree monounsaturated fats, have a higher smoke point, and they're less prone to oxidation. And now they use things like peanut oil and soybean oil, and they weren't really using that over 100 years ago. It was a recent invention, even in places like Asia, where you kind of associate soybean oil now with their cooking. But, you know, even peanut oil has a better composition, but I would recommend you watch out for peanut oil. So the thing is, when you consume these things, not only are they these seed oils and high omega-6 fats, not only are they direct precursors to pro-inflammatory prostaglandins, but they also create more lipid lipid peroxides. So lipid peroxides are essentially like direct inflammatory molecules that oxidize and create free radicals in the circulation after consumption, and they literally break down into highly damaging compounds that produce more reactive oxygen species. And again, it's like, it's not going to kill you until the amount of endogenous glutathione and antioxidants that you produce can no longer sustain the protection. So it's a battle. It's a battle between the amount of free radicals you produce and the amount of antioxidants your body produces. So that's why I don't eat seed oils, but every now and then I'll be okay with it. Like, I'm not like hypochondriac these days. Like, I go to buffets all the time, and if I go to a sushi buffet, I might eat their hot oil with my sushi, right? But back in the day, I was like super hypochondriac. But I realized you don't really need to completely avoid these things to have pristine health. But you'll see a lot of these like biohackers and stuff, and a lot of these people in health communities that are just super scared of like consuming anything they think is unhealthy. Like, if I drink tap water every now and then, I'm going to die of like calcified pineal gland. It's like, no, maybe not. Maybe you'll have worse outcomes if you're dehydrated, right? But drinking tap water every now and then, probably not going to kill you, unless it's like contaminated. So another thing I'll kind of add to this is like stomach acid, something I didn't discuss in part one, I don't think. But, you know, like modern society is so scared of eating raw animal foods. And it's funny because one of the primary sources of like salmonella poisoning and food poisoning is actually raw vegetables. And you see all these communities of like raw carnivore people, which again, I don't think that's necessary or even rational per se, who eat a lot of like raw liver and even things like raw chicken and raw pork. And you'll see videos of like these really hot girls eating raw steaks on film. And then all the comments are people saying like, oh my God, she's going to have worms and parasites, and how is she still alive? And to me, it's astonishing, first of all, that these people don't research it further, because you'll see that there are hundreds and hundreds of people who eat raw, like completely raw carnivore diets. And they actually seem to be way healthier than the average population. They don't die. They don't even get symptoms of parasite poisoning, parasitical infections. So a lot of parasites don't even show symptoms. But to me, that again is just a complete contradiction to mainstream society's paradigm of we must avoid infections at all costs. And I think the real reason why these people are able to consume raw animal foods and not die is because a healthy human stomach acid is similar to the acidity of a scavenger animal, like a hyena. From what I remember, healthy humans are supposed to have a stomach acidity of something like 0.8 to about 2.0. Supposed to be acidic enough to consume basically decaying animal flesh. But, we have this backwards idea of health, and this backwards idea of things like acid reflux, for example, where if you have acid reflux, doctors will give you anti-acid medications, when the reality is what you really should be doing, what most people do to completely resolve their acid reflux, is they actually consume apple cider vinegar before meals. And over time, it seems to kill off pathogenic bacteria in the stomach and in the intestine, and it seems to regulate the pH of the stomach and reacidify it to the point where whatever the mechanism is, whether it's the sphincter in your esophagus or whatever, regulates over time, and you no longer have acid reflux. I believe the acidic stomach acid is actually the primary driving force behind preventing food poisoning and preventing things like parasitical infections. And when I say food poisoning, there's a difference between going to Whataburger and getting a bunch of deep fried food and consuming bacterial infected foods or viral, whatever, parasites. So anyway, these are kind of just working ideas that I'm kind of working with, basically. And it's not meant to be super scientifically accurate, whatever that means. But I have kind of seen time and time again, I don't know necessarily what the deep mechanisms are behind especially things like infections and glutathione and stuff, because the fact is your immune system is not exactly the same as endogenous antioxidants. But I know the byproducts and the breakdown of the immune system dealing with these things involve glutathione and whatnot. And there's a huge, there seems to be a large degree of efficiency or efficacy of supplementing glutathione and taking N-acetylcysteine and overcoming infectious issues, or at least the severe symptoms of such a thing. So I think this is a big kind of thing that is underlying the mechanisms, is how much of a damaging burden are you putting on your body, and then how much protection from glutathione and these things we mentioned in part 1 are actually helping. So without further ado, avoid seed oils, avoid smoking, avoid excessive alcohol consumption, avoid refined carbohydrates. Maybe try at least a cyclic ketogenic diet. Consume tonic herbs. Eat 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight of protein for the precursor nutrients. Eat whole animal foods. And go do vigorous exercise, go to saunas, bolster your hormetic protection, and view part 1 if you haven't already. And I'll talk to y'all next time.